shotgun. We hiked 4 hours before arriving at a tiny, still lake that was tucked away so deep in the forest that it seemed unspoiled. The ideal location for our tent was a level stretch of sandy beach. We prepared after swiftly setting up camp and driving stakes into the solid ground. They gathered wood and constructed a modest fire. The flames wavered, orange in contrast to the trees. The only sounds in the Mirror Flat Lake were crickets and the sporadic splash from some fish that are not seen. Your mind finally slowed down because of how serene it felt. At 9 o'clock, we put out the fire and hid inside the tent. After Tom closed the door, we got into our sleeping bags. I laid there and listened to the complete silence. There were no automobiles, no aeroplanes, no far-off homes, only the quiet breathing of the woodland. At first, it made me feel little, but in an oddly reassuring way. I heard something about an hour later. It began softly, with only the sporadic snap of a branch. I disregarded it at first, but then the sound again, heavier and slower this time, like purposeful footsteps walking through dry leaves, not running around like raccoons or deer. These were sluggish and weighty, as if someone were cautiously approaching us. My chest constricted. Not a single person had been spotted on that trail for the entire day. At night, who would be out here? The footsteps ceased, directly outside our camp. Then the ground was illuminated by a beam of light that was so strong it could see through the thin cloth for a tent. It passed over the trees, the fire pit, and our baggage, my entire body confined. Beside me, Tom awoke completely and muttered, "What the heck is that?" The light moved straight towards the tent after hovering close to it. We exchanged a terrified glance and responded immediately. Tom discreetly unfastened the back flap before the torch could reach the door, and we slid out into the shadows. 10 or 15 feet away, we hid behind a huge hemlock tree and grabbed the camp axe and little gun we'd brought. Not so much for actual self-defense as for comfort. We observed the tent door unzip from behind the tree. A man entered. He was tall, possibly in his mid-40s, with a disheveled beard and clothing. He had a big shotgun in one hand and the torch in the other. My stomach turned at the sight of the rifle drop. His voice was harsh and irate as he rummaged through our things and yelled, "Where are you? I am aware that you are out there. Please come out and greet me." Wide and pallid in the darkness, Tom's eyes locked with mine. "What do we do?" I muttered. His mouth tightened in terror as he simply shook his head. Re-entering the tent, the man swept his torch through the forest. The beam came very near to where I had to will myself not to blink in my hiding place. He raised the shotgun and aimed it directly into the shadows. "Us," he growled. "You think you can hide?" He then fired after pumping the revolver. The quiet was broken by the explosion. A tree's bark burst off just a few steps away from us. To avoid making any noise, I bit down firmly. My heart was I was afraid it might reveal us, because it was slamming so forcefully. Tom spoke a barely heard murmur. "Stay put. Just stay put," the man muttered to himself as he stalked our encampment. He dispersed our belongings, kicked our fire pit, and even pushed a few objects into the still hot embers so they would burn. He occasionally laughed, but it was obvious that something wasn't right with him because of his shaky, slurred laugh, perhaps intoxicated, or worse. The minutes seemed to drag on 4 hours. With all of our muscles tensed, we knelt in the chilly dirt and waited for him to either locate us or depart, depending on which happened first. I couldn't stop picturing him hauling us outside or firing aimlessly into the night. Out of annoyance, after what must have been 20 excruciating minutes, he finally stopped pacing. After taking one more irate look about the campground, he turned and headed back into the forest. The footsteps gradually vanished as the darkness engulfed them. But even after we were unable to hear him, we remained concealed. No longer. We didn't move until the first day. Even when the breeze came back and the woodland began to sound alive, dawn's dim light seeped through the trees. Everything was in disarray when we eventually limped back to camp. Some clothing was burned into melted mounds, food was strewn about, and bags were torn. We packed. Our hands were trembling so much that we dropped things twice, but we managed to recover what we could. Neither of us spoke much during the walk. Tom said, "That was too damn close," at one point. He might have murdered us. I was limited to nodding. The entire journey back, the knot in my chest remained tight. We immediately reported everything to the ranger station. The ranger stated as much. May have been a troublesome local who disliked people living close to his property. Our statements were taken by the police, but that didn't alter the night's atmosphere. We never returned to that location. Even now, my stomach turns at the memory. The final tent before daylight. We picked up the truck and drove until the pavement failed and the dirt road took over. Nestled deep within the forest, Dismal Creek was peaceful and barely more than a ribbon of chilly water. It moved slowly between dense forests of oak and pine. It was flawless. We chose a location down the bank where there was just enough space between two trees, a fire pit and tents. As day gave way to dusk, we were content to be out there casting lines, chatting about nothing, and listening to the woods settle about us. We built a small fire and cooked hot dogs over it as the sun began to set. Like tiny orange fireflies, sparks fluttered upward into the darkness. We heard it at that point. Both of us turned. A man moved towards the fire's glow. He appeared to be in his 50s, perhaps older, with clothes that had seen to many seasons and disheveled hair stained with grey. With a crooked smile that suggested he was delighted to have found someone, he carried a battered rucksack. "Evening," he remarked. "I didn't mean to frighten you guys. Do you mind if I take a seat? I've spent the entire day trekking." Tom gave me a look. On treks, we had before encountered strangers, campers, hikers, and hunters. That's nothing out of the ordinary. I gave a nod. "Yes," Tom replied. "Take a seat. Do you want a hot dog?" The man, who identified himself as Randy, sat cross-legged by the fire and took the food as if he hadn't eaten in days. He immediately began talking, informing us that he lived nearby and that he was familiar with every corner of the woods. His stories were fascinating for a time. The changes he had observed in the creek, local history, and old fishing stories. However, the more he spoke, the more alien he felt. His eyes continued to flicker, as if he was searching for something that was hidden from our view. Even when his hands weren't cold, they kept rubbing against one another. Additionally, each time the heat twitched as the fire burst, he said, "You boys come around here often?" "No," I replied. "I've never been here before." "It's serene." Gazing into the flames, he slowly nodded. "Calm." "Yes, but you have to exercise caution. In these woods, things take place." Tam chuckled. "In what way?" "Our snacks are being stolen by black bears." Randy didn't grin. "Even worse." The phrase lingered like smoke. I made an effort to ignore the bad feeling that was starting to creep up my back. Perhaps he was simply lonely. Perhaps he had been absent. Too much time spent alone here. Tom eventually stretched and yawned. "We're going to call it a night. Fishing early. Randy stood tomorrow. Do you mind if I set up camp nearby? Nighttime wandering is not safe." I wanted to decline. Tom shrugged, but there was something about him that made my stomach turn. "Sure, just don't say anything." A short distance away, Randy set up a small bivvy. Tom and I quickly got inside our tents. I listened to the creek's gentle murmur for a while, attempting to get rid of the uneasiness that was on my chest. Somewhere Ian fell asleep during the night. Then I was awakened by a sound, a slow, deliberate shuffle, as if to avoid being heard. "Tom," I said, while holding my breath. No answer. Then I heard a zip. Tom's tent opened gently. My heart pounded so violently that it ached. I squinted out as I leaned towards my tent's netting. Randy stood behind Tom's tent, turned to face me, a rifle in his hand, his shape visible in the faint moonlight. "Hey," I said in a barely audible whisper. "What are you doing?" He slowly turned his head. His expression was hollow and lifeless, as if all the warmth had vanished. Then, silently, he fired into Tom's tent after raising the gun. The trees were shattered by the shot. Tom let out a dreadful, raw scream, and suddenly it stopped. I froze. It was too much for my mind to handle. I had the impression that I was watching a nightmare from outside of my body and was unable to awaken. Randy turned to face my tent. Just as he aimed and fired, I scurried back. The initial bullet struck the side of my ears were ringing from the intense, blinding ache in my neck. Another knocked me forward by slamming against my back. I fell hard to the ground, gagging on the taste of copper, blood. All my instincts cried out for me to run, to move, to scream. However, I made myself remain motionless and pretend to be dead. It was the only opportunity I had. As if he had just run a mile, Randy stood there panting. Then he turned to Tom's tent and rummaged through it, while whispering to himself. "Should have listened," he muttered. "Things happen out here." I did not move. It's a struggle every second not to cough or gasp. The borders of my vision became blurry. My heartbeat pumped through the world. He then made his way to the truck. I heard the engine running and the keys jangling, struggling and revving excessively. Then there was a crash. A tree and metal, quiet. I held out. 210 seconds. I was no longer aware. Time was consumed by the agony. At last, I pushed myself out of the tent and crawled over leaves that were slippery with my own blood. Tom's tent remained motionless. I was hit by the sight like another bullet. I wandered into the forest, trying to maintain pressure on the wound by gripping my neck. It felt like wet sandbags on my legs. My face was clawed by branches. There was fire in every breath. However, stopping meant passing away, so I continued to move. The majority of that stroll escapes my memory, just suffering darkness and my family's thoughts. I stayed upright because of that. Eventually, through the foliage, a dim illumination emerged, headlights on a far-off road. The first car that went by didn't notice me when I waved at them. I continued till I came to a house with a glowing porch light. I pounded on the door and fell when it opened. Before I knew it, I was in a hospital bed with bright lights overhead. The physician claimed that nothing had been hit by the gunfire, essential by pure chance. A couple inches in either direction. A few days later, they apprehended Randy. He passed away before his trial. They stated it was heart failure. I'm a little relieved. I wish I could have asked him why. I can't stop thinking about that night. The jokes, the fire, the smile on a stranger's face that concealed a violent and broken side. I lived. Tom didn't. And that's the I'll never be able to shake it. And that's the I'll never be able to shake it. The next door girls, my mother enrolled me in Girl Scout camp in Oklahoma because she believed it would help me meet girls my own age, learn some outdoor skills, and come out of my shell. I recall my rolled up sleeping the previous evening while I packed my small duffel bag, satchel, a small notebook, my silver torch and the supply of snacks that I had concealed under various shirts to avoid being seized by the counselors. I felt both anxious and thrilled. It felt like a step towards adulthood. The bus ride to Camp Scott seemed to go on forever. Throughout, the windows rattled, and the scent of sunscreen and bug repellent blended with the vinyl chairs. Girls screamed over each other, sung, and whispered. However, I largely imagined what the camp would look like as I gazed out the window at the woods and fields that passed. The entire bus hummed as we eventually passed through the wooden archway with Camp Scott engraved into it. I recall thinking the location appeared enormous. There are dense forests all around, pathways that veer off into the shadows, and groups of canvas tents erected on wooden platforms. Earth Kiowa unit was given the group. My tent, number 6, was near the showers in the informal horseshoe-shaped arrangement of tents. 3 girls were staying in tent 7, which was just next to us. At the time, I had no idea how important that particular detail would be. In the naive sense that only young summers can be, the first day felt magical. We went on a quick walk. We sang songs around a bonfire until our throats were dry and worked on crafts beneath a large open pavilion. At lunch, I had met the girls from tent 7, bright-eyed and barely 8 years old. Laurie's wavy hair bounces as she spoke. 9-year-old Michelle was laughing uncontrollably. 10 like me. Denise is quiet and contemplative. They asked me to join them for a seat. Laurie smiled at me as she opened her lunchbox. She said, "Hey, Jenny," as if she had known me for ages. "Want to exchange cookies at a later time? I had some chocolate ones. Only if you also share your marshmallows." I made a joke. Michelle joined in, kicking her feet beneath the picnic table as she laughed. Michelle leaned in. Earlier, I heard something strange. Someone discovered a note, like a practical joke. According to one counselor, there was something about murdering girls in a tent. She said it casually, as if it were rumors she didn't trust. Denise didn't chuckle. Her gaze wavered. Who would write such a thing? It's not amusing. I tried to look bolder than I actually was by shrugging. Most likely older children playing around. However, I ignored the slight chill that ran down my spine. The counselors reminded us of the lights out regulations as night fell. Stay in your tents, avoid wandering, and refrain from conversing loudly after nightfall. Anna and Beth, my roommates, as I climbed into my sleeping bag, they were already whispering. Did you hear about the note? In the dark, Anna whispered. The one they discovered in a donut box. Beth retorted in a whisper. Yeah, it said something about a mission to kill 3 girls in Tent 1. But they renumbered the tents this year. So maybe it doesn't mean anything. I took out my tighter sleeping bag around my body. Let's avoid discussing it, I said. It was just a stupid joke. However, the uneasiness persisted inside. It was difficult to fall asleep. The trees seemed too vast, too silent, as if they absorbed every sound. Time felt weird at some point after midnight, either earlier or later. The distinct sound of footsteps on dry leaves awakened me up. Not the quick gait of a counselor, but slow and thoughtful. Something different. I held my breath, paying attention. Anna stirred. Are you awake, Jenny? Yes, I muttered. Have you heard that? Is there someone outside? Barely aware, Beth muttered. A counselor is simply making rounds. Return to your sleep. However, the sound of footsteps was not that of someone making rounds. They went about. They came to a stop close to our tent. They then retreated once more in the direction of Tent 7. My gut twisted with both curiosity and anxiety. I moved closer to the flap and lifted it slightly to look out. All that is present is darkness. Next, for a brief while, there was a faint flicker of light, similar to a torch swinging low. The beam just making contact with the earth before disappearing once more. With my heart racing, I swiftly closed the flap and lay back down. A couple of distinct, quieter sound, a muffled groan, perhaps a cry, was heard a few minutes later. It strayed away from Tent 7's direction. I froze. Explanations flashed through my head. A nightmare was experienced by someone. There was a sick person. The next sound was longer, more agonized, and genuine. But it was still someone playing around. With a trembling voice, Anna whispered, "What was that?" It sounded as though someone was in pain. Beth sat up straight now. Perhaps we ought to get a counselor. However, we were afraid of breaking the law, afraid of making a mistake, and afraid of what it would mean to acknowledge our fear. The sound then ceased. The silence came back, thicker than before, far away, on the road that bordered the camp. I thought I heard a car's engine roaring. At night, that route was supposed to be deserted. The sound of the engine subsided, then vanished entirely. Even though it didn't feel like it, I must have ultimately fallen asleep. With birds chirping as if nothing had occurred, dawn arrived softly. Silently, I walked out of the tent to the showers. I saw something off the route in the trees as I got close to Tent 7. It initially appeared to be only a sleeping strangely far away from the tents. I moved in closer, speculating that someone might have pulled theirs out as a practical joke. Then I noticed a little, pallid, still arm. My only breath caught in my chest. Before my brain could tell my body to stop, I took a step closer. More forms were present. 2 bodies were jammed onto another lumpy sleeping sack. Dark spots of blood seeped through, and a well-known shoe protruded from one suitcase. Laurie's tiny brown trainer. I choked on a cry as I staggered back. At last, there was a scream. I shouted for aid as I ran. Assist the girl. There's a problem. Something took place. Miss Rogers bolted from the counselor's tent. Slow down, Jenny. What took place? Shaking, I pointed. That way. Bags for sleeping. Blood, please. They're not moving. Her face turned pale. After telling me to keep put, she ran in the direction of the trees. Other counselors were yelling, sobbing, and requesting radios in a matter of seconds. After that, everything became hazy. Shouts, sirens, police vehicles, the entire camp disintegrating. Inside tent 7, they discovered blood, a size 9, and a half shoe print from a male, and a big red torch that was left on top of the girls like a terrible signature. The letter regarding killing 3 was discovered once more. Girls, it had not been a joke at all. I described everything to the police, including the engine on the road, the light, the moaning, and the circling footsteps. A farmer around 2 or 3 in the morning. Others in the area reported hearing the same odd traffic. Jean Leroy Hart, an escaped prisoner with a troubled past, was taken into custody. The trial was widely reported in the media. Guilt was implied by the evidence, but the jury declared not guilty. A few months later, Hart passed away due to cardiac issues. Years later, Tess was adamant that he was the murderer. However, by then, the truth seemed like a ghost. It's too late to make a difference. Even as I became older, I never forgot that night. I can still hear footsteps circle a tent when I'm lying awake. I continue to see the dim glow of the torch swung and vanished. That muffled groan from the shadows is still audible to me. What would have happened if he had selected tent 6 instead? I still wonder. What if our flap had been opened by him? What if I had been foolish enough to approach the sound out of curiosity? Camp was meant to be enjoyable, safe, and full of songs, education, and purity. Rather, I learnt the most terrible lesson from it. Dangerous threat could be right outside your narrow canvas wall, waiting and observing. Narrow canvas wall, waiting and observing. The incursion, we loaded supermarket bags full of inexpensive food, sleeping blankets, and a battered guitar without a tuning peg into 2 rattling old vans. There were roughly 25 of us in all, largely children from our hometown in Florida, along with a few amiable locals we encountered. The 2 exhausting days of the road were filled with awful singing, petrol station munchies, and the delightful feeling that none of us had any idea what we were searching for. However, we were aware that it wasn't in the city. At a rest stop, a local by the name of Dave waved us down when we eventually arrived in the North Carolina mountains. "There's a spot you'll like," he remarked. "Briar Bottom, right on the river. Quiet, real peaceful." We trailed his vehicle down a meandering dirt road. Joel came out, smiled, and spread his arms. "This is ideal." It was like creating our own little planet when we set up camp. Lena unrolled the bulky canvas, while Tom and I pounded stakes into the ground. "Make it sturdy," yelled Rita. "I'm too exhausted to battle a tent that is collapsing." Tonight, Joel knelt inside ours and smoothed the sleeping bags next to each other. He squeezed my palm briefly and said, "Cozy," which warmed my heart. Dinner was easy. Goodies from people's luggage, including fruit and sandwiches. However, it felt almost like a party, with 25 of us seated in a loose circle. Small groups of people drifted to their tents. Rita waved and yawned. "I'm tapping out. If you have fun, wake me up," occurs, rubbing her eyes. Lena trailed behind her. Joel and I were by the fire, embers burning crimson. Before long, "Come on, let's go to bed." The comfortable darkness enveloped us within the tent. Someone laughed and mumbled something somewhere far away. Then there was silence. I must have slept off completely because the sound jolted me awake like a hand on my throat. A rumbling sound. Engines shut off. Joel jolted to consciousness. "Have you heard that?" I refrained from breathing. The noise intensified, then abruptly halted as if trucks had just rolled across the river. Then there was silence. A natural, heavy, then footsteps. A few sets of slow crushing through the grass. Too heavy for animals. Deliberate. I muttered, "Someone's out there." Joel forced himself to stand. Most likely. However, the tent wall was suddenly illuminated by a torch beam. Another voice gave stern commands. Hands hit the canvas. "Now get out." Panic erupted at the encampment. Tents were unzipped. People yelled bewildered. I saw them when I opened our flap. Men wearing vests, spotlights, and firearms. Their motions unlike any officers I had ever seen. They were aggressive and sharp. They rummaged through backpacks and kicked sleeping bags. Joel yanked me away. Remained seated. Rita's tent was torn open by a man. She let out a scream. "What are you doing?" "Department of the Sheriff." He growled. "Search for drugs." Tom staggered from his tent. "Raise your hands. We lack anything. We are merely a shove." "Cut him off. Quit talking." Lena came out next, shaking. "We haven't done anything, please." Her remarks were meaningless. Our eyes were scorched by flashlights, guns aimed at us as if we were a threat rather than children going camping. With a firm but trembling voice, Dave moved forward. "This land belongs to the public. You are unable to treat us like the leader." A tall, icy man who pressed his gun into Dave's midriff. "Go now." Dave ignored it. "Don't make that point." The rifle was swung at him by the leader. The world broke apart, slamming echoes of a tremendous blast via the trees. Everything froze for a heartbeat. Then the air was ripped apart by a pellet spray. Joel's beside me. My body twitched fiercely. He clutched his chest. It was unbelievable how quickly blood seeped through his shirt. "Aid," he stumbled and gasped. "Somebody," he said as he fell into the lawn. With trembling hands, I knelt next to him and applied pressure to the wound. "Remain with me. July, remain with me, please." Wet, bubbling, and slipping were his breaths, with tears spilling from her eyes. Lena knelt on his opposite side. "Wait, Joel, please," he said. But his chest remained motionless and his eyes were unfocused. Before I knew what had occurred, he was gone. The men gazed in stunned silence. The leader then snapped out of it. "Grab the body right away." Body, not victim, not person. Body. They seized him, grabbed Joel's arms and legs, dragged him like garbage, and threw him into a truck's bed. I lunged for him and screamed till my voice broke. As engines screamed to life, Tom grasped me and pulled me back. One final time, the lights passed over us, then disappeared into the forest. Everything was engulfed by silence. The grass was drenched in blood. Rita was crying. Lena covered her face with her hands. Dave appeared to have aged 20 years in an instant as he gazed at the ground. Nobody slept. Nobody said anything, fearing that the trucks could return. We gathered together and waited until daylight. Within, a ranger discovered us in the morning. There were new officers, actual cops, composed ones, perplexed ones. They inquired enquiries, made notes, and pledged justice. We found out the truth later. The men that stormed us were from the local sheriff's office. They were absolutely out of control and acting on power-driven rumors. According to the leader, there was a struggle when the rifle went off. 4 months, the trial dragged on. Ultimately, he was let free with a slap on the wrist. That's all. Joel was not given another opportunity. He was received nothing. Years have gone by, but I'm still haunted by that night. The footsteps in the shadows, the abrupt explosion, the instant I recognized that the globe isn't always secure, even in lovely locations.